Old man Jeb leaned against his shovel, his gaze sweeping over the golden fields stretched wide beneath the afternoon sun. Another quiet day in Weaver's Hollow, and for Jeb, that was just fine. The season had been good, the harvest coming along without trouble, and he figured he might even get a little extra corn to sell this year. His neighbor, Sam Whitlock, tipped his hat as he drove his tractor down the dirt road, the hum of the engine blending with the gentle rustling of the crops. Everything seemed right. A tremor rippled through the ground, subtle but unmistakable, and Jeb's hand instinctively gripped the shovel tighter. He looked up, scanning the skies. No storms were expected, but a low, ominous hum rolled through the air. Birds scattered, their wings frantic against the blue. Jeb squinted as something metallic gleamed far above, catching the sun's reflection like a mirror. At first, it was a curiosity, then a shadow, and then he saw it. No, them. 5 colossal shapes cut through the clouds, descending slowly, their surfaces slick and glinting. They weren't planes, that was certain. These crafts moved with a deliberate, almost predatory elegance, hovering in the air like hawks sizing up their prey. The noise grew louder, drowning out the usual sounds of the fields, the comforting hum of life suddenly overtaken by this foreign, jarring presence. Jeb's heart pounded as he realized these things were not of Earth. The crafts hung above the fields, silent and menacing. People emerged from their homes, shielding their eyes against the glare to look at the strange shapes hovering above their town. Mayor Riley, who had been watering his roses in front of the town hall, dropped his can and stared in horror, mumbling a prayer under his breath. He was a man of reason, not one to believe in fairy tales or wild theories. But this was undeniable. In an instant, the aliens descended further, sleek metallic pods breaking away from the mother ships to land directly in the fields. The vessel's exteriors were marked with strange symbols, dark patterns etched across gleaming, unearthly metals. As they touched down, the earth itself seemed to shudder in response. From each pod, figures emerged, tall, lean creatures covered in segmented armor, their heads elongated and expressionless. Their eyes were dark, unreadable slits that swept across the terrified townsfolk with cold calculation. Panic began to ripple through the crowd. The villagers murmured, some shouting for others to run, while others were too stunned to move. Jeb, however, felt his initial shock giving way to something stronger. Anger, maybe, or pride in the land he had worked his whole life to protect. As the nearest alien figure took a step toward him, he squared his shoulders, meeting its gaze with a challenging glare. The alien raised a long, 3-fingered hand and pointed it directly at Jeb. A strange, distorted voice crackled through some kind of translator on its chest, the words almost recognizable but laced with static. This land is claimed for the Nyrex Dominion. Human resistance is futile. The statement hit like a blow, and fear turned to fury in Weaver's Hollow. Old man Jeb wasn't the only one to straighten up. Sam Whitlock pulled his tractor to a stop and jumped off, grabbing the nearest rock. Mayor Riley, usually a voice of calm, bellowed for everyone to gather weapons, even as basic as they were. They had rifles and farm tools, and though these weapons weren't advanced, the people of Weaver's Hollow were more than willing to defend their land. The aliens took no heed of their defiance. Instead, they began to scan the fields, their slitted eyes narrowing as they ran sleek devices over the crops and soil. Jeb noticed it too late. With a flash of light, one of the aliens raised a small, black device and pointed it at Sam, who had barely taken 2 steps toward the alien before being knocked back, his body crumpling like a rag doll. A stunned silence followed, the gravity of the threat now painfully clear. "Stay back!" Mayor Riley shouted, hands raised, though his own voice betrayed his dread. Everyone, get inside now. But retreat didn't seem to be an option. The aliens marched forward, their every movement precise and unfeeling. They pushed into the fields, their devices still buzzing, capturing samples of soil and vegetation. Despite his growing fear, Jeb's eyes narrowed. He'd worked that land since he was strong enough to hold a hoe, and now these invaders, whoever they were, thought they could just take it? The farmers, emboldened by each other's defiance, gathered in small, scattered groups. There was no strategy, no battle plan, just a raw determination to defend what was theirs. Jeb met Mayor Riley's gaze, both men exchanging a wordless understanding. It might be foolish, and it might be hopeless, but they weren't about to go down without a fight. Then, a strange shift caught Jeb's eye. One of the aliens knelt, examining the soil with unusual intensity. It lifted a sample to its face, running a strange tool over it. The others joined it, speaking in low, guttural voices, as though they discovered something unexpected, something they hadn't anticipated. Jeb didn't understand what they were looking for, but he knew enough to realize that they'd found something intriguing in Weaver's Hollow's dirt. Whatever it was, he didn't care. If it slowed them down, that was all he needed. He grabbed his shovel, gripped it tightly, and with the rest of his town at his side, prepared to defend his home. Jeb watched from behind an overturned tractor as the alien creatures clustered around a patch of disturbed soil. Their sleek, segmented bodies hunched over, their clawed fingers scraping the earth, peeling away layers as if expecting to find gold. Jeb's pulse quickened. He had never been one for rumors, but he knew the stories about Weaver's Hollow, whispers of something ancient and powerful buried in these fields. Something his grandfather had told him to let lie. The Nyrex creatures pulled strange devices from their belts, scanning the soil. Low, guttural murmurs filled the air as they examined whatever it was they had uncovered. The devices they held emitted red and green lights, flashing with a rhythm that seemed to excite the aliens. The closest creature knelt, holding a chunk of earth up to its face, and Jeb could see something glinting in the dirt. A sliver of metal, old and tarnished but unmistakably human-made. Jeb felt a chill creep down his spine. If the legends were true, these fields were home to remnants from an old war, technology so dangerous it had been buried to prevent its use. This secret had lived on only in folklore, forgotten and ignored as the generations passed. But the Nyrex had stumbled upon it, and the glint in their dark, unfeeling eyes suggested they had an inkling of its potential. Mayor Riley, Jeb hissed, pulling the older man down beside him. The mayor's face was a mask of tension, his eyes tracking the alien's every move. "What is it, Jeb?" Riley whispered back, his voice barely audible. "Look, over there. They found something in the ground," Jeb replied, nodding toward the aliens. "This ain't just about stealing crops or land. They're looking for something else." Riley's eyes widened, his breath catching. "You think it's true, don't you? The stories." Jeb nodded, his gaze hardening. "I reckon they're true enough to get these folks interested. If it's what I think it is, we're in a lot more trouble than we thought." The two men fell silent, their hearts pounding as the aliens worked with a focused intensity that was almost reverent. Then, one of the creatures let out a sharp cry, gesturing to the others as it pulled a small, cube-like device from the soil. It was old, corroded, yet it pulsed faintly with a strange, cold light. Jeb's eyes narrowed. He'd seen old pictures, read the stories. The relic was a piece of technology from the early wars, a power cell from a weapon humanity had long since abandoned for its devastating potential. His grandfather had once called it a core of night, a dangerous device designed to amplify energy and emit powerful radiation bursts. The war it had been built for had ended, but the weaponized artifacts were too dangerous to keep, so they'd been buried and forgotten. The Nyrex chattered to each other, their dark eyes gleaming with an unholy interest. They'd stumbled upon a treasure trove of lethal technology, far beyond anything they'd expected from simple farmers. And now they wanted it desperately. Without warning, the lead alien rose, its arms shooting out toward the villagers' hiding spot. A shudder ran through Jeb. It had seen them, perhaps sensed their fear. Its voice came through the translator, hollow and threatening. "Humans, you possess power beyond your understanding. Relinquish it, and you may live. Resist, and your entire species will fall before the Dominion." Jeb clenched his jaw. He could feel the weight of his father's and grandfather's sacrifices pressing down on him. This land and everything hidden in it belonged to them, not these cold, calculating invaders who looked upon him and his people as nothing more than ants to be crushed underfoot. The villagers behind him exchanged glances, their fear palpable but overridden by something stronger, a fierce protectiveness. Mayor Riley raised his voice, every ounce of his conviction apparent. "We didn't ask for trouble, but we won't stand by while you take what's ours. We're not the ones who should be afraid here." The Nyrex leader's gaze remained cold, unmoved by the mayor's words. It tilted its head, then pointed back toward the core of night, as if dismissing the human's bravery as mere posturing. Another alien pulled a device from its belt, aiming it toward the townspeople. Jeb's mind raced. He knew they were outmatched, yet he also knew the value of surprise. Weaver's Hollow might be small, but its people were clever. He could use their knowledge of the land to turn it into an advantage, as flimsy as that might seem against alien technology. "Riley, listen," Jeb whispered urgently. "We need to keep them from getting to the rest of what's buried out here. There's a whole arsenal hidden under our feet, and if they get to it, there's no telling what they'll unleash." Riley nodded, a fierce glint in his eye. "Then we stop them, here and now. The land is our ally, Jeb. Let's show them why." The two men shared a look, an understanding born of years of shared hardships. The people of Weaver's Hollow weren't warriors, but they were stubborn, and they'd do whatever it took to protect their home. Mayor Riley motioned to the others, signaling them to fan out and flank the aliens while Jeb ran back toward the barn. There was an old generator in there that could be rigged to release an electromagnetic pulse. Maybe it wouldn't be much, but if they could disable the Nyrex devices, even for a moment, it might give them the opening they needed. As Jeb hurried away, he could hear Riley rallying the townsfolk, his voice rising above the hum of the alien machines. "This land has secrets older than any of us, and we've got more courage than they'll ever know. We stand together, folks. Let's show these invaders what Weaver's Hollow is made of." The townspeople scattered, each one taking up a hidden position, every last one of them clutching whatever tools they could find. Jeb's heart hammered as he rigged the generator, his fingers shaking. He was no soldier, but as the hum of the machine grew stronger, so did his resolve. They might not survive this, but he'd be damned if he let these invaders take Weaver's Hollow without a fight. With one last glance toward the horizon, where the alien ships loomed like specters, Jeb pressed a switch. The generator emitted a surge, crackling as the pulse shot out over the field. In an instant, the aliens' devices flickered, their cold lights dying for a brief moment, and that, Jeb knew, was their chance. The pulse from Jeb's rigged generator hit the aliens with a sudden, disorienting force. Sparks danced along their sleek devices as the fields filled with the strange, garbled static of malfunctioning equipment. For the first time, the Nyrex Dominion soldiers hesitated, their cold composure flickering as they glanced at each other, momentarily vulnerable. It was all the opening the people of Weaver's Hollow needed. "Now!" Jeb hollered, waving his shovel like a battle flag as he charged toward the nearest alien. Around him, townsfolk rose from behind hay bales, overturned tractors and wooden crates, the tools of their everyday lives transformed into weapons. Farmers held their pitchforks high, wielding them with practiced precision, while others hefted their hunting rifles and hammers, a makeshift militia fueled by sheer determination. Sam Whitlock, his jaw set with grim determination, aimed his grandfather's hunting rifle at one of the aliens. He squeezed the trigger, and the sharp crack of the gunshot echoed across the field. The shot hit home, and the alien staggered back, its segmented armor cracking where the bullet struck. A greenish-black ooze seeped from the wound, the sight as alien as the invaders themselves. A second later, the other Nyrex soldiers recovered, their leader letting out a distorted roar as it rallied its forces. Weapons flared back to life, emitting pulses of electric blue light. Several villagers dove for cover as beams scorched the ground, kicking up dirt and filling the air with the stinging smell of burnt earth. But the townsfolk didn't falter. They spread out, using the familiar terrain to their advantage, slipping between rows of corn and weaving through old fence posts. Jeb had barely a moment to catch his breath before he felt something shift beneath his boot. He glanced down, realizing he was standing on yet another buried relic, an old, rusted energy cell. He recognized it immediately from the stories. A pulse grenade from a war before his time. With a quick glance around, he called to Sam and Riley, motioning them over. "We've got one shot at keeping these bastards off our land," he shouted over the roar of alien machinery. "They're too strong up close, but we can blast them from a distance if we use these relics right." Riley, sweat trickling down his forehead, gave a sharp nod. "Then let's put Weaver's hollows past a good use." He clutched a piece of rusted metal in his hand, a relic that looked like an old detonator, and with a determined look, he pulled the pin, rolling it toward the nearest group of aliens. The grenade exploded with a shuddering pulse, sending a shockwave that flung two of the Nyrex backward. Their bodies sprawled on the ground, twitching as their armor sparked and hissed. For a moment, hope flared in Jeb's chest. They could do this. They could actually hold their ground. But the Nyrex leader, taller and broader than the others, stepped forward undeterred. It raised an arm, and a blinding beam of light shot from its gauntlet, searing through the air. Jeb barely had time to dive to the ground as the beam cut a line through the cornfield, incinerating the crops and leaving a trail of scorched earth. Jeb's heart pounded, and he felt the weight of desperation pressing down on him. If they didn't stop the Nyrex here, the aliens would seize the buried technology, and Weaver's Hollow would be just the first casualty. He looked around, his fellow townsfolk still fighting, battered but undaunted, their faces set with the fierce determination only people defending their homes could muster. Mayor Riley, his voice hoarse but unwavering, rallied them again. "Hold the line! Don't give them another inch!" His voice cut through the chaos, and it seemed to light a spark in everyone who heard it. Driven by Riley's call, the villagers surged forward once more. Jeb took advantage of the temporary distraction, ducking low and skirting around the back of a farmhouse. He spotted a small group of children huddled in the shadows, fear written across their faces. "Stay low, all of you," he whispered, his voice softer. "We're gonna push these invaders back, you hear? Ain't nothing getting past us." The kids nodded, eyes wide, clutching each other's hands. Jeb felt a pang of resolve deep in his chest. This wasn't just about the land, the relics, or some ancient grudge. It was about the people, his neighbors, his family, everyone who called Weaver's Hollow home. The Nyrex leader, growing frustrated, raised a hand, barking orders in its guttural language. Its troops formed a line, their weapons aimed with deadly precision. Jeb could see it in their posture. They intended to end this quickly, but Weaver's Hollow had one last trick up its sleeve. Jeb, Riley, and Sam, using what they'd scrounged from the buried arsenal, set up an ambush around the town's largest oak tree, a tree that had stood as long as anyone could remember. They layered the ground with traps, pulse mines, and energy charges, creating a web of explosive surprise. They baited the Nyrex, who, blinded by their mission, moved in without hesitation. When the first alien crossed the invisible line, Jeb signaled to Riley. With a sharp nod, Riley threw the switch, and a chain reaction of explosions tore through the field. Alien bodies were flung into the air as sparks and debris rained down. The Nyrex leader howled, fury evident even in its alien voice, but its forces had been weakened, their numbers whittled down. The few remaining aliens staggered back, the confidence in their stance replaced by uncertainty. The people of Weaver's Hollow, scraped, bruised, but unbroken, pressed forward, their makeshift weapons raised high. For the first time, the invaders looked at the humans not as pests, but as formidable opponents. They exchanged glances, then, with an air of reluctant respect, they began to retreat, their ships hovering just above the fields. The townsfolk watched, weary but triumphant, as the Nyrex leader finally turned and rejoined its troops, vanishing into the silver crafts that rose back into the sky. But Jeb knew this fight wasn't over, not yet. He looked to Mayor Riley, who, dirt-streaked and breathless, nodded, understanding the look in Jeb's eyes. "We've won for now," Riley said, "but we better be ready if they ever come back." Jeb stared at the fields around him, littered with relics and scorched earth. "Then we'll be waiting." The silence that followed the Nyrex retreat was brief. Just as the villagers dared to hope, a tremor surged through the ground, rattling windows and shaking the last golden leaves off the oaks. From above, the hulking alien ship that had loomed over Weaver's Hollow like a metal storm cloud finally descended, its shadow stretching over the fields. The leader hadn't given up. It was preparing one final assault. Jeb clenched his fists, his heart pounding. His gaze darted to Mayor Riley, whose steely resolve had yet to waver. The townsfolk, scraped and bruised but determined, gathered together, their faces set in grim defiance. Jeb's eyes swept across them, their bruised faces, the hastily bandaged arms. They had given all they had, but there was still a fire left in them, an iron will that refused to break. The alien ship's main bay door began to lower, and a wave of dark-armored soldiers lined up, their weapons gleaming under the faint light of Weaver's Hollow's autumn sky. Jeb saw the leader at the forefront, a commanding figure whose cold, dark eyes betrayed a glint of malice. They weren't simply here to claim Weaver's Hollow. They intended to wipe it off the map. With the bay door open, the alien leader raised an arm, a gesture of finality, as if ordering the annihilation of the entire town. The townsfolk felt the shift, a silent, heavy decision settling upon them. And just as the alien soldiers took their first step, Jeb realized there was one last line of defense. The field's buried arsenal. Jeb turned to Riley, a wild plan forming in his mind. "Riley, remember the big one, the Core of Night? I think if we could trigger it somehow." Riley's eyes widened as he grasped the idea. "You're saying we use it to take them down once and for all?" Jeb nodded. "We can't let them take what's here, but we're going to need to get close enough to trigger it." "I'll go." The mayor grasped his shoulder. "Not alone, you're not. We'll go together." With quick, shared understanding, Jeb and Riley sprinted toward the hidden cache beneath the soil, diving down to where the ancient devices had been buried. With the rest of the townsfolk covering them, they clawed at the ground, each second ticking down as the alien forces advanced. Finally, their hands closed around the Core of Night, a compact but powerful device, rough with age yet still pulsing faintly. Jeb took a deep breath, locking eyes with Riley. "Once this goes, we'll need to get as far back as we can, but if it works, it'll create a blast strong enough to knock out the whole field." Together, they ran back, and with the support of their people, they managed to set the core at the heart of the field. The townsfolk hurriedly retreated, positioning themselves behind whatever cover they could find. Jeb, his heart racing, hit the activation switch on the device, sending out a surge of low, humming energy. The Nyrex leader, sensing something amiss, halted and raised a warning cry, but it was too late. The core emitted a sharp pulse, and in an instant, a surge of energy erupted, spreading in a brilliant wave across the field. The aliens' weapons sputtered, their ships flickering as the core's energy disabled their systems. The blast force sent the Nyrex soldiers tumbling, their armor cracking under the impact. The villagers watched in awe as the alien leader staggered, its dark, calculating eyes finally showing a flicker of fear. For the first time, the Nyrex dominion had been thwarted by something beyond its control. In the chaos, the leader staggered forward, its composure shattered, and in a last-ditch attempt, it raised its weapon toward the villagers. But Sam, rifle in hand, didn't hesitate. He fired a single, unerring shot, and the Nyrex leader fell to its knees before collapsing into the scorched earth. A tense silence fell over the fields as the remaining Nyrex, dazed and disarmed, turned to flee. Weaver's Hollow had won. The villagers, battered but victorious, watched as the ships, flickering with damaged lights, finally ascended, leaving the humans below to their hard-won peace. Jeb stood amidst the smoldering remains of the battlefield, feeling the quiet settle around him like a heavy blanket. Mayor Riley came to stand beside him, his face lined with exhaustion, but filled with a quiet pride. They had defended their home, and in doing so, protected a history that was both a burden and a treasure. "We did it, Jeb," Riley murmured, looking out over the blackened field. "They thought we were nothing more than farmers." Jeb nodded, his voice steady. "We may be farmers, but this land, it's always been worth fighting for." The townsfolk slowly gathered around, exchanging quiet smiles and weary embraces. Together, they defended Weaver's Hollow and its legacy, and though the scars of the battle would linger, they knew that their small town would stand strong, no matter what the stars threw their way.